Hello and welcome to the Royal Blue podcast. We are live across YouTube and Facebook. My name is Ian Croll and I'm joined by Joe Thomas, the Echo's Everton FC home and away correspondent. Joe, how are things?
Yeah, not too bad, cheers. Not too bad. A relatively quiet week so far. Probably a little bit quieter than necessarily expected with the appeal verdict slated for mid-February. I think we're well and truly in mid-February now, and it's one of those, it could come at any moment. But obviously, the longer it goes into this week, the greater the chance of it being next week. So a little bit surprised at that, but hoping for a conclusion as soon as possible.
Yeah, we'll come on to a little bit on that, but the main purpose of this, live streaming this podcast is to talk about the 7-7 takeover and what that means for the club. But like you said, that we were expecting a bit, big news regarding Everton's point deduction. So you're a little bit surprised that it hasn't come yet.
I'll be surprised if it hasn't come by the end of the week. I thought it was going to come this week. Obviously, there's still time. We're Thursday afternoon here. It might be quite interesting. Obviously, depending on how much coverage the Premier League is hoping this gets, Friday evening or Friday mid to late afternoon would be an interesting time to drop it. Say, for instance, if they didn't want as many eyes, as much scrutiny as possible, because obviously, the later you get towards the end of the week, the harder it becomes for Sunday newspapers who have all their big plans for everything, working on throughout the week to mobilise in time, and also because, from Saturday morning, whatever happens on Friday night, from Saturday mid-morning onwards, a completely different news cycle starts as you get to the early kick-off and you've got a weekend of fixtures. So, Friday's a good time to bury potentially contentious news, but the people who are suggesting it might be this week are now suggesting that it might be a little bit longer. So
surely the Premier League can't be that cynical and think that this news is going to be buried underneath everything else this coming weekend.
I think that one thing that we've noticed, or should have noticed over recent months, is the fact that optics is a very big part of everything that pretty much every organisation does, including Everton, and many others in all sorts of walks of life, particularly the ones that we are engaged with on news and sport. And I don't think you could ever be too cynical about how someone might try and game a release of something to their advantage.
Okay, well, just a reminder to those listening, watching on YouTube, Facebook, please comment, get your questions in, get your opinions in, and we'll give you the shout out. We'll read your questions out and we'll try and answer them as best as we can. But Joe, the main reason why we're here for this podcast, this live stream, you've written a piece today, a slight update, I'd say, probably on that, prospective takeover by 7-7 partners of Everton Football Club. It's been a long time coming. It's still not done yet in terms of there's no decision either way.
Yeah.
Are you able to just give a little bit of an update to those watching on your piece on what's basically been touted out today?
Yeah, well, it's February the 15th today, and for a lot of people listening and watching, probably won't have escaped them that the announcement that 777 planned to take over Everton was on September the 15th. So it's exactly 5 months today. So probably like a fair few journalists probably looking to look at that time frame and look at that. I mean, anniversary feels like a strange way to frame it, but just try and work out quite where we are, and probably a little bit kind of pushed on a little bit as well by obviously the Premier League confirming Sir Jim Ratcliffe investment, kind of acquisition of a 25% share of Manchester United earlier on this week. That also kind of gives you pause for thought, because on the one hand it's 5 months, and in the release when Everton confirmed the deal, they were hoping for a end of 2023 deadline. Obviously we're a long way past that, but we've also seen in Sir Jim Ratcliffe's takeover and acquisition of a stake in Manchester United that these things can be done quite quickly, because obviously that was one he came to the table a lot later than 777 did with Everton. So an obvious question has been to ask for quite some time, but we've had so many different issues kind of fight competing for attention with Everton for so long. It's difficult to kind of focus on all of them all at the same time. And but it made sense to try and work out where we are with 777 at the moment. And the reality is that it still hasn't been confirmed or rejected yet. Both options are there in the Premier League's court. I think the reality is we're waiting on the Premier League, the Financial Conduct Authority. They approved their element of it just before Christmas. The FA has a regulatory role.
To interrupt you, is that a new side of things? Because wasn't there a new layer of scrutiny on takeover of football clubs?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is more built into a beefed up Premier League owners and directors test. So that has been kind of more, become more, provides more scrutiny of potential new owners. And also there's as part of that process now, the Premier League have an independent oversight panel, so whatever decision they come to on a potential acquisition, they then run it by that. So then there's another week or 10 days or so of oversight, so that somebody independently verifies the original decision or looks for any holes. We're not at that stage yet with Everton. The Premier League have got to reach their conclusion first, and then pass it to a panel, and then we'll find out.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we're moving towards a conclusion. There are people now. There is no set time frame for these things. That's probably an important thing to start. There's no, unlike say with the points deduction, the profit and sustainability, where written into the Premier League handbook there is a formula for how long things should take, when a panel should be convened, when the first meeting should be held, when documents should be served, when the case will be heard, and then when an appeal can be heard after that. There isn't anything like that for an owner and directors test in the Premier League handbook. So it's it's how long is a piece of string.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have Sir Jim Ratcliffe taking just a couple of months. On the other hand, you probably say that's a little bit easier because it's a 25% stake, not 100% stake, or not a majority stake. And also, I think that, I mean, when you've got a bank balance, as I imagine he's got, I don't think he'd have had any difficulty proving, he's one of Britain's richest men, so probably proved quite easily had the funds to do what he wanted, and to follow through his plans. On the other hand, you have Newcastle and the Saudi takeover. That took 18 months. So these things can take any length of time. And obviously we're 5 months in here, and that's a lot longer than was suggested at the start of the process. Obviously that suggestion came from the Everton /777 side of things, so maybe they were a little bit bullish or a little bit ambitious. I think there's an acceptance that they were, because obviously we're 6 weeks into the new year now and still no word. But it feels like from both sides, when there's an acceptance that we're moving towards a conclusion. People close to the speaking to today, they're expecting some sort of formal approach from the Premier League over the coming days, and they expect that to pave the way for the almost essentially put in motion the beginning of the end. So they're hoping that the decision could be just weeks away, and in fairness to them, that kind of chimes with what the Premier League chief executive Richard Masters was saying when he appeared before the select committee last month. He was saying obviously it's complicated, can never say how long it's going to be to make a decision, and within that, I'm sure most people are aware of it, he kind of hinted that there might have been a few issues with the application, that some of the questions remained unanswered, but even he at that point suggested it was hopefully going to be weeks away. Well, that was a couple of weeks ago, so you would think that we must be getting close anyway.
There's no massive grievance from you then with I mean, can we call it a delay? It's like you said, Newcastle's took 18 months initially, and then the United Sir Jim Ratcliffe's acquisition, it's taken obviously less time than Everton. So in a way, that time frame, like you say, it's an open book. But with the United one getting over the line first, like you say, it's probably, I don't know, would they scrutinise it as much as they have done the Everton one? You would expect so, maybe just because it's 25%, and the Everton owner is, the takeover is it, what is it, 94%. So would they need to look at, more? I don't know. Like what would they need to look at? Surely they just
probably
need to...
a more intense process, because obviously someone that's coming in to take complete control of the club, whereas they already know who runs Manchester United, who will remain the owners of Manchester United. Obviously the Glazers will continue to do that even with Sir Jim Ratcliffe's 25% acquisition, but obviously he might build on that going forward. But there's probably a little bit less scrutiny in relation to that. Obviously proving your funds and your business plan's a bit different if you're coming in as a minority partner, as opposed to if you're coming in, you want to take the whole thing. And obviously we know that Everton is already committed to some big financial projects, obviously the stadium being number one. So anyone coming in has got to be able to show a plan for how they could run the finances, whereby they try and complete that, and what they're, as well as run a Premier League football team as well. So there's probably a few more avenues to go down for something like this. I don't really think that At this stage, I don't think we can be that aggrieved that it's taken so long, because I think that really this is a process where, at its heart, and obviously I think that have questioned a lot some of the practices and the processes of the Premier League overseas over the recent months in relation to Everton, obviously mainly the points deduction. So, we can't pretend that everything's going to be perfect with this, but really, if done correctly, this scrutiny process should be something that is good for football fans, because what it should do is it should prevent people who aren't fit and proper from coming in, taking over these institutions, which are so prestigious, so prized and precious to football fans and their local communities. So, really, I think we want it to take as long as it needs to take them to come to the right answer. The only area where I think there might be a grievance would be if, say for instance, the Premier League were to knock it back. If we were to then find out why, and it turns out that the reasons it's going to knock it back would be ones that they've known about for months on end, and it's just been sat on a desk gathering dust while they deal with lots of other things. At that point, I think it might be fair to have a grievance if that happened, because 777 right now put a hell of a lot of money into helping Everton cover its running costs month to month. If their support was to be withdrawn going forward, then that might cause Everton some difficulties in terms of its everyday operations. Now, if that was to be the case, I'm not saying it is going to be the case, but if that was to be the case, then unless something new has come up in the last few weeks, you would hope that conclusion would have been drawn, or you think it would have been far fairer for that conclusion to have been drawn before or during January, because at that point, Everton would be in a position where, say for instance, they thought we're going to have, gaps to cover here in our expenditure. They would at least have the option then to potentially sell players if they needed to bring in the money that could then cover them for however many months or weeks it takes them to try and find new investment or new prospective owners and start the process again. So Everton would be at a significant disadvantage if this was to be rejected, and I think if it was to be rejected for reasons that have always been an issue, rather than something that's come to light in since mid-January, then I think then there'd be a genuine grievance, because you'd say, well, you're not really giving the club much of a chance here. So,
you mentioned the sale of obviously assets and players, and it's obviously the last thing that we want. We've obviously got a number of saleable assets, but we don't want to be doing that, do we? We want to be building a team. We want to be moving up the league. It's the last thing that we want. And
of course. And I think one of the things that we saw in this January was, and we know that the transfer market was very different just globally to how it is, how it has been previously, but where there was probably some progress was Everton didn't buy anybody, but they didn't sell anybody. And if you look back at the last summer, they sold Alex Iwobi, started every game he was available for Sean Dyche, sold him on transfer deadline day, sold Tom Cannon, the most the biggest youth prospect on transfer deadline day. You go back to last January, they sold Anthony Gordon, 45 million. You go back to the summer before that, they sold Richarlison, big tattoo, all because of profit and sustainability in the wider picture. They didn't do that in January, and that's a good sign. But one of the reasons they didn't do that in January, they didn't feel they had to, was because some of the money was coming in from 777. So, if that was to be, I doubt they'd carry on putting money into the club after their takeover proposal had been rejected, and then that could cause problems if that was to be the scenario that played out.
For me, it's just a slippery slope of, if you get into a point where you need to sell players just to, like you said, cover operational costs and survive, it's like I say, it's a slippery slope. But we've got questions coming in, we've got opinions coming in, keep them coming in, and just going to read one of them now. So Eamon Dobbins on Facebook, Joe, says, I have a bad feeling that the Premier League is going to throw us under the bus. So, just to interpret that, I assume he means they're going to reject this he thinks that they're going to reject the 777 takeover. What are your thoughts with regard to that? Does this takeover need to go through? There's no other option in your mind?
I think that I mean, in relation to Eamon's point there, I mean, you could argue they've already thrown Everton under the bus with the 10-point deduction in the first place, and
That's a whole other podcast.
And it feels like Deitch has just picked them up off the floor, and they're stumbling back across the road, and it feels like there are more buses on the way, and you're just trying to work out whether they're going to get hit by them or narrowly avoid them. To use a very poor kind of analogy there. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because. It'd be interesting to see what is at the heart of the Premier League's thought process behind closed doors here. Because on the one hand, they clearly want the right people to be in charge of football clubs. I think that's something that we all want. But it depends where the threshold lies for a decision for what's right and wrong for Everton right now, because there are two very different questions that could be asked. And one is, are these the right people to be coming into the Premier League? And there's the other one is, are these better than the current scenario with Farhad Moshiri having kind of essentially, be looking to walk away from his support? What's the worst alternative here? If they decide that 51% to 49%, they don't think these are the right people to take over Everton, but it's like a narrow margin, do they then move on to the question, well, they might not be as savoury as we'd like them to be if they're on that, but this is a better option than rejecting them, because obviously the integrity of their league depends on the financial strength of the institutions that are in it, including Everton. And Everton are a massive club with a big fan base and a huge history in the English and the European and the world game. Yeah. Like, watching a club like Everton crumble will not look good for the Premier League. And again, it has to have that kind of, or it might have that political, that optics kind of view in case as well. And it's a really interesting one because Farhad Moshiri has a lot of money. His access to it is reducing. If 777 were to be rejected, he'd have to look for alternative investors. There are murmurings that there might be others lying in wait. Everton would be carrying a lot of debt for any takeover, for any prospective group or company or person that wanted to take it over. But there's still positives if you have the money or you have a plan to kind of get it on the right financial footing first. There is still an opportunity with Everton, albeit a difficult one that requires some clever thinking and some planning and careful work to get there. So I don't think it'd be the end or anything like that. But I do think that, and also because I think that of all the people that could potentially say if there were issues and wanted to try and call the administrators in, a lot of people that are owed money would get less of a return if the club went into administration.
Well, that was
they would lose it, so they would lose out themselves. So there's almost no interest in them kind of triggering it. It'd be more likely to be an external party or someone if the bills aren't paid. But similarly for Farhad, for him to walk away, well, he's got a much better prospect of getting more money back for a club that's running and covering its costs than for one that's going into administration. So there might be a potential down the line for that to happen if this was to be rejected in the first place. But probably the most influential people in that process all have a say in the club continuing to operate. So,
well, my concern is obviously massive Everton fan. So you do worry about the club. We all worry about the club's future. I've seen and heard and murmurs, suggestion and speculation that if this deal doesn't go through, the club could end up in some sort of administration or just go, full into administration. But, like you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. The more I was thinking about it, that obviously doesn't benefit Farhad Moshiri. Why would he want to put the club into administration? Because he would never get a return. But you've said we don't know what other prospective buyers are out there to invest in the club. So, I mean, it seems to me as well, Moshiri has stopped bankrolling the club as well. Not that he doesn't care, but he just thinks this is coming to the end now. Why do we need to continue bankrolling the club when new owners are coming in and they're willing to invest? Obviously, we've talked about 180 to 200 million pounds worth of loans. Is there a worry that administration is round the corner if this takeover doesn't go through? Should be worried about that, because then inevitably we don't know what the future holds after that, but we know there will come another points deduction.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult one because we don't really know the ins and outs
Yeah.
of Everton's finances.
I'm just worried, Joe.
Yeah, no, I can completely understand that, Warren. We can't give guarantees either way. Look, I think that on the one hand, you can say that 777 are putting a lot of money into the club to help with its operating costs on a month-to-month basis. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't have to, because
Yeah.
obviously there's an element of risk there for them, because if they get rejected, then that's money that they become owed rather than equity that they can have in the club. So clearly there's a bit of a shortfall there, or there's a scenario where it's more preferable for them to be putting the money in than getting it from anywhere else.
Massive
That
shortfall.
doesn't mean to say that they can't get it from anywhere else, and it probably becomes less of a question about what it becomes more of a question about how much Farhad has and is willing to put in to carry things going, and probably until the summer when you can then get potentially sell players to bring in some money. That there's obviously a danger. You look at the finances; they're not very good for Everton. But I don't think it would, if I don't think we're in a scenario where, say, for instance, 777 get rejected and then the next day everything collapses. I think that, I think there are enough people and with enough of an interest in that not happening to at least give them a bit of time to maybe find an alternative solution. Even if you look at something like, say, for instance, you look at MSP. MSP wanted to take over Everton or get a big stake in Everton in the summer. That fell through, but they still lent it £100 million towards the stadium and things like that. Well, almost a better way to protect. There could almost be a situation where, say, for instance, if 777 fell through, MSP, their best way to protect that £100 million might be to put a bit more money in to keep the club going until a more sustainable solution's found. And once they're in there, they can then start paying back the money and they can get their £100 million back. So, whereas if it goes into administration, that wouldn't happen. So, I think there are a lot of things that could. I don't think Everton's in a particularly strong financial position at all, and I think that the money that 777 are putting in shows us that. I also think it's important to to look at the January transfer window, and no one was sold. Everton did have players that even if they were sold on the cheap for what they are, could still have brought a lot of money into the club. The fact that they didn't do that, even as a contingency plan, maybe it was a gamble, or maybe they just go, you know what, we do have a backup in place that can just keep us till the summer if the worst comes to the worst. So, can't give a definitive answer.
No.
But
in terms of, I don't really want to discuss this because it's gone in the past, but January, it was like a merry-go-round, wasn't it? Because no other club really came in to test the waters with Everton players because they were unable to because of the profits and sustainability rules. So Everton were just kind of left, not in limbo, but they were kind of just left to carry on with the day-to-day, and no offer, as far as we know, came in for a Nana, a Pickford, a Branthwaite or anything like that. So it was we don't know for definite if a big offer had come in, whether Everton would have accepted that or not.
Well, I think that I think that if Everton wanted to felt they needed to sell one of those players, then I think they probably could have got a deal for them. I think Jared Branthwaite's a hugely exciting prospect. We know clubs across Europe are watching him. It feels like he is moving towards a situation where he's going to be competitive for the national team. He might end up. There's a scenario where he could easily end up in the squad for the Euros. Obviously, some of his rivals, like Mark Guehi and Ezra Konsa, are both injured at the moment, so that helps him. I think that if it had been known that Everton were struggling so much that you could get him for, say, 30-40 million pounds, as opposed to, I think he's worth double that. And the same with Amadou Onana. If you could have, if it became known he was available for 30-40 million pounds as opposed to probably the 75 plus that he's worth, then I imagine that they would have been able to have found somebody to buy them. If they felt they had no choice but to sell them just to keep them going, then I think they would have found a deal. And the fact that they didn't do that perhaps suggests that either a confidence in the 777 thing going through, and or a belief that they might be able to kind of just keep themselves going if it wasn't to go through for long enough to kind of find an alternative source.
Okay, just on the 180 million loan that 777 have given to Everton as obviously as a loan. To me, from the outside, probably looking in, it massive concern because it seems like there's black hole. We've talked about it. Machedi seems to not be bankrolling the club anymore. But obviously, that money, like you said, operational costs probably go into the stadium as well. But is it also a ploy from both Everton and 777 to force the Premier League's hand to say, well, we're going to be £180 million in debt to another investor if we don't get this 777 deal over the line. But if they do get the deal over the line, it's like, well, we've got the takeover that we wanted, and this £180 million was obviously worth what was vested into the club.
Yeah, well, if they're trying to do anything to force the Premier League's hand, then they're not doing a very good job, because
Yeah,
we're 5 months in and we still don't have an answer.
Yeah.
But obviously, you would imagine it would be quite influential. It'd be helpful for 7-7's plan for the narrative to be, if this is rejected, then Everton collapse. That obviously makes it harder. We, in theory, should make it harder for the Premier League to turn them down, because obviously they wouldn't want the club to go into administration. So it is probably, there is a degree to which it's probably helpful for that narrative to be out there, and we have to be careful about how much we buy into that. And but we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah.
I mean, so I'm asking you the difficult questions, Joe. What are 777's motives here? Do you think they own a number of football clubs? They've got controlling stakes in a number of other clubs. They've already lent to Everton £180 million. We know Everton have got a massive asset now in the stadium. It's going to be worth hundreds of millions of pounds. Just in your opinion, really, what are the motives? Because surely they're not going to be making hundreds of millions back off Everton over the coming seasons, are they?
Well, not in the short term, but in the long term, I imagine that the motive is to make money. So, and the stronger and more vibrant their multi-club model is, the more clubs it's got, the more opportunity there is to move players around it, and to create a network that improves in all the different leagues that they're in. So, look, there is potential with Everton. Obviously, it comes with a lot of debt initially, and a lot of problems in relation to profit and sustainability and the strength of the current squad. But they're in the Premier League. If Everton can be a consistent Premier League club, which it has been throughout the entirety of the Premier League, then what is guaranteed is access to huge sums of money every single year from the from the rights, the TV rights deals, and everything that comes with it, and the prestige of having that within their model. So, when there are easy wins that can help to make Everton more sustainable and more economically viable. Obviously, once you get the stadium over the line, and then that's you bring in a lot more money from ticket prices and all the stuff around it, all the events and stuff like that. So I mean, and all that can be used to help push them up the table, and you see it's millions of pounds different for every position you move up the table as well. So there is probably a way in which if you had Everton as a fresh start, it'd be quite easy to move forward, I think, and make them more financially viable. At the minute they're not, because they're just in a club that's been in a bit of a mess for a couple of years, and it's just caught in a really complex spiral of problems. But if you can find a way in which just to kind of maintain at a relatively low cost, maintain Everton as a Premier League club for a couple of years in a row, then I think it becomes quite straightforward to start moving the club forward. And really, if you look at this season, Everton spent nothing in January, but they sold players. They spent nothing in the summer, but they sold players. So they're bringing money in, and they're bringing money in. They've got a tiny squad, and Dyche really has them in a position where they should be 12th. They should be about 9 points clear of the relegation zone. That's in itself is a miracle. But I mean, in terms of your footballing costs, the things that you spend money on, like the wage bills come down, money's coming in from transfers rather than going out on transfers, and then moving up the league. And for every league position that you move up, it's worth an extra £3 million or so. Better you are, the more games you get on TV. Things like that. The more games you win, the more fans start coming. Showing an interest, and you pick up around the world and want to start buying merchandise. So, I think Dyche has shown a way where you can turn he's turned a side that's been in two really, really difficult relegation battles in. And he's probably had a worse squad available to him than Lampard did, both when he kept Everton up and then when he started the next season. And he's turned them into a team that by rights of on the pitch activity should be mid-table. He's done that whilst bringing in money rather than spending it. So, there is an opportunity there, but things have to be managed properly. And I think one thing that we've seen over a sustained period of time is there hasn't really been any long-term sensible financial planning, and Everton are currently still feeling the consequences of the strategies that they followed through on, several years ago, and it's Farwell and Deitch who've inherited the problems and are trying to kind of solve them with what probably both hands tied behind their back, not just one.
Yeah, I mean that probably brings me on to my next point then. So, we've heard whispers, we've heard murmurs of other fans across the world, clubs owned by 777. So, just obviously the likes of Vasco da Gama, Standard Liège, like Genoa in Italy. I haven't spoken to any of these fans, by the way, but you see reports, you see stuff on Twitter, you see a lot of stuff on social media. They're quite clearly not happy with 777 as their owners. I don't know the ins and outs of exactly why, but Everton have been in turmoil for a good couple of years now off the pitch, and which has basically resulted in effectively 2 relegation battles. Third one, obviously now due to the points deduction. I think the point that I'm trying to say is that if 777 do come in, we really need them to stabilise this club, because if they don't, then it's obviously going to be a roller coaster. It's going to be up and down. We don't want any more relegation battles. We obviously want to be fighting up at the end of the table, the top end of the table. We want to be, getting to the far end of cup competitions. I think what I'm saying is, when 777 come in, if they do come in, we need them to, we need to settle things down. It can't just be turmoil in the back room, in the boardroom again.
Mm. Well, I think that if you look at the other clubs that they operate, most of them, they've taken it. They target distressed assets. They target clubs that they know that they're basically in a very vulnerable position, so they can get them for a much cheaper price. But they obviously do that believing that they can turn things around and eventually make them more economically viable.
Yeah.
Well,
that's me.
That's
a
long-term process, because what they don't do is they don't come in and put lots of money into transfer kitties. And I think that it's probably the expected process for Everton, like with a lot of those other clubs, is Everton have been in a difficult position for a long time. It's going to be an incremental improvement rather than it's unlikely. Apart from with a bit of luck, or say for instance, maybe if they sold a few players and all the money in January got reinvested into the squad, and the squad was shaped in a more sensible way, I think it's not going to go from fighting for 16th, 17th, 18th to fighting for 4th, 5th and 6th any time overnight. But obviously the hope will be that if they have a more stable financial footing, it then becomes easier to move up the table. And even with the chaos that Deitch has been operating in this season, we've seen that they should really by rights be a mid-table side. And so getting from 18th, getting from 17th to 12th might not necessarily be the issue, but obviously getting from 10th to 6th, 7th, 8th is probably where the issue is going to be.
Yeah.
A lot of the clubs who are within 777's portfolio continue to have problems while 777 have been in charge. And there are 2 ways in which you can look at it. On the one hand, there are plenty of red flags, and there is a lot to look at 777 and be concerned about in terms of where they get their money and perhaps what their motives are and how they intend to manage things going forward. On the flip side, you could say, well, all of the clubs that they've taken over have been in trouble, and they're problems that they've inherited, and they're naturally going to take a long time to overcome. And therefore, when clubs have been in, had issues with their own league, their own country's authorities, and been threatened with things like deductions and transfer bans, which obviously has been a thing that we've seen with some of those other clubs. The question is probably, is this because of anything 777 have done, or is this the overhang of the regimes that 777 took over from? And that's a really difficult question to answer. In the same respect that obviously Deitch and Farwell are dealing with points deductions and profit and sustainability limitations, not because of what they've done, but because of what managers have been allowed to do in direct football prior to them have been allowed to do. 777 might turn around and say, well, we can't escape all this stuff immediately because we're still having to, things were so messy, they take time to put right. And that's probably a little bit of the conflict at the moment, trying to work out whether these are good operators that are coming into really difficult situations that take a lot of time and a lot of energy to turn around. It's a messy process, or are they just a continuation of a theme? And that's the clear fear here. We will only know with time, and obviously they're relatively new owners of most of those other clubs, so it's difficult to kind of give a an exact view on how they've run them just yet. And the chances are, by the time we're in a position where we've been able to watch them long enough to form an opinion, an accurate opinion on whether or not they were good or bad owners, well, that's still probably a couple of years away. And Everton's is going to be, at the very least, it's going to be decided in the coming months. So if they get approved, then if they get rejected, that'll tell its own story. If they get approved, there's probably going to be a lot of learning on the job from fans watching them.
I mean, is there an argument to say that they've got too many clubs in the portfolio? I mean, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that they've bought these clubs in the hope that they fail. That's obviously not a good business strategy. Like you said, they've obviously bought these clubs and obviously want to buy Everton to make them a success. But I just think on and off the pitch now, it's just in modern day football, it's all hand in hand. You only have to look at the most successful clubs over the past 10 years, 20 years, whether that's in the Premier League or across Europe. They've had stability in the boardroom. So is there a suggestion that they've got too many clubs on the book portfolio and they should be just concentrating on set clubs themselves?
Yeah, well, it depends what they do with them, because obviously multi-club operating models are something that we're seeing more and more of, but with varying degrees of success. Obviously Manchester City are part of one. We've seen that, and you look at what they're doing. Obviously, they're the best team in the world, and you look at Girona, who are part of that model over in La Liga. Who are competing with the big guns at the minute for Champions League places, and at the minute competing for La Liga title. But they got beat by Real Madrid recently, and it may well be a case of fight for Champions League for them. But then you look at, on the flip side of that, you look at, say, the likes of Watford and Udinese and the countless player trading between those two clubs, and obviously, neither have had a huge amount of success. So I think that on the one hand, you can make a case to say it makes sense to have a small number of clubs that you can focus intensely on. On the other hand, if you have the more clubs that you have, the more markets that you have access to for youth talent and things like that, and for player trading, for deals and all sorts. So I think it probably depends less on the model and more on the owner, and kind of like just in relation to what I was just saying a minute ago, in relation to the owner. At the minute, I think it's fair to say that they've got a troubled track record with the clubs that they own. The question is, and you have to probably give them a degree of the benefit of the doubt on this, is whether or not those issues are the result of the situations that they've inherited, or whether they're a result of the new ownership. And that's something that's difficult to judge at this present moment in time because of how new they are to a lot of these clubs.
Okay, just to the comments, the Blues YouTube channel has said, "All right, lads, hope you're well." All the better for that YouTube comment.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it.
Richard Edwards on Facebook says, "Surely the board are examining other options should the 777 deal be rejected. They wouldn't make this public knowledge yet anyway, surely."
Yeah, I think that's fair. Look, I think that, and this is the thing. I think it's easy to be. I think it'd be right to be concerned if 777 were to be rejected about what happens next for Everton Football Club and where that would leave the club financially. I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that we should be concerned, but I also think that you would hope that there would be contingency plans in place. Like any sensible business person, any sensible board would surely be doing that. One of those contingency plans would have been to have maybe sold a key player in January just to perhaps bring a bit of money in, just to have as a safety net, just in case something happened. And one way of reading the fact that they didn't is the fact they didn't believe that was necessary. So maybe you can take a bit of confidence from that. And that's one of the reasons why I think it would be wrong to kind of overcommit and say, if 777 fell through, it's curtains straight away. I think that, there are lots of different moving pieces here. And I think, judging from the club's actions in public, say it didn't do that. So hopefully there's a confidence that they could at least carry on paying the bills for a little bit longer while they sorted something out.
Interesting one here, Joe. Did you see that Jagielka interview on TalkSport earlier in the week? Jace Como said, what did you make of the Jag statement saying he believes the Premier League won't ever relegated? What did you make of that? Obviously, Jag's a massive Everton fan. He's wearing his heart on his sleeve.
I think the Premier League would be absolute fools if that was a strategy that they wanted to undertake. Because I think that, Everton like I said at the beginning of this, I think Everton are a massive club with a big fan base, a prestigious history.
Yeah.
Everton are the type of club that they should want to be in the Premier League, and then obviously they shouldn't necessarily want different clubs to be in the Premier League and pick and choose who should be there. But there is no doubt that for the Premier League to be its strongest, you want the 20 biggest clubs in there, and Everton would be one of them. The Premier League is stronger for having Everton in there than it is for not. Now, whether or not there's a degree to which Everton are causing a hell of a lot of work to be done in the Premier League at the minute, and we've countenanced the idea that things like the deduction and the profit and sustainability treatment that Everton have received might be an attempt by the Premier League to almost make an example out of someone to try and prove that they don't need independent regulation or things like that. Maybe that is part of it, because obviously we know they're under scrutiny for it. But they haven't done a very good job of it. I think all they've done is serve to prove that independent regulation is needed in football, and of the Premier League, rather than that they're mature enough or responsible enough to be able to handle their own affairs without outside interference. Obviously it's a difficult thing to say. I don't think the Premier League would want Everton relegated, but I do think that the Premier League are seeing Everton as a massive thorn in their side at the minute, and part of that's because of the way the Premier League have treated them and handled the cases, I think.
Eugene McGeever on YouTube has said, I think Roy Hodgson is getting the sack from Crystal Palace. Barry P said, looks like Roy is quite ill apparently. I know he cancelled his press conference, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's Crystal Palace are really clearly in a really difficult situation at the moment, and I think that that game on Monday really does look important.
Massive.
As most games of Palace at Goodison Park seems to have been over recent years, it does. But I think first and foremost, above everything, we'd wish Roy a speedy recovery and hope it's not serious, whatever it is.
Yeah, okay, last of the comments on YouTube, Barry P. Sensible one, to be fair, Joe, but it says, not a fan of 777, but their business model is that clubs run within their means, which is what we want, to be fair. We don't want to be kept afloat from outside of our means.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we've seen, we've read Farewell a few times before and after transfer windows, and he's talking very much about trying to move towards a more sustainable kind of football model on the football side of things. It needs to be like that on the off the pitch stuff as well. Like absolutely, that has to be the goal. I think the goal has to be finding a way of financial stability within Everton, and then working out, once you've got that platform, working out where it can take you to. But first things first, they've got to get stable first.
I mean, we say that. I don't disagree whatsoever. I can completely agree with what you said as well. But it's our understanding. I mean, the Premier League have already come out and said that they're going to change the profits and sustainability rules. So we don't know exactly what that's going to mean. But if you read between the lines and look at it, it obviously means that they're going to, reduce the rules a little bit, and clubs are going to be able to spend more money in the coming seasons. Because let's face it, if clubs can't spend big, transfers, wages, the Premier League suffers as well. The product suffers because they're not getting the best and the world-class players coming to the league.
Yeah, well, I mean, what their intention is to do is probably make the financial regulations more stringent, so it brings them in line with what UEFA do in Europe, which is, I think with that, it's the wage bill's going to be no more than 70% of turnover. And you look at Everton's, it's been high 80s and 90% over recent times. So actually, it would probably make things, bring things into more financial control rather than less, and greater regulation rather than less. So that obviously makes it. I think all the rules, in particularly the current profit and sustainability ones, they're designed to protect the integrity of the league. But what they kind of do is they just entrench the existing elites, because it's far harder to play catch up with the teams that are already the teams that have, because you see how Newcastle at the moment, they can't just spend without any constraints to try and get up to the compete for the title. They've got to do it step by step, incrementally. I think that's better for the game overall. I think more financial regulation is probably better for the game and better for football fans than less. The problem that Everton have had over recent kind of years is they've just been caught in a really difficult scenario where things have gone specifically bad for them at a time when you know, more and more rules and regulations have been coming in, have been enforced with more vigour at a time when they've been trying to play catch up rather than being one of the haves already at the top.
Okay, well, months of uncertainty will hopefully come to, with regards to the Everton takeover. I don't know about the points deduction, but months of uncertainty are going to come to an end in, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks with regards to 777. We believe that 777 have been required to submit financial paperwork, and we understand that they've done that. So it's kind of just,
777's position is that they've answered all the questions that have been asked of them. They've submitted all the documents that they've been asked to submit. And 777's position is essentially that their case is now on the desk of the Premier League, waiting to be, put a big tick or a big cross next to it. And I think they're hopeful that, well, one, they're confident that it'll go through. And I think that they would point to the £180 million they commit to supporting Everton, and they'd say, well, they wouldn't have put that money in there if they didn't think they were going to get it. If they didn't think they were going to get it, because it's one of the things that's important to note is obviously at the minute that's £108 million or so that Everton are in debt to 777. It's junior debt, so in terms of who they pay off first, rights of media come before them and MSP come before them. So for them to be putting so much money in on those terms suggests a bullishness that they believe that they're going to be, end up in charge, and that's what they'll. That's where they'll be, because otherwise, it becomes a very difficult or a much harder or much less preferable position for them to be in if they get rejected. But obviously, it's one thing being confidence. We still don't know the process yet. We still don't know the outcome yet. In the Premier League, we'll have lots and lots and lots to consider. There are real question marks over 777 and where they get their money from and how they run the businesses, including the football clubs, but including others that they operate. And that might be one of the reasons. Obviously, Richard Mass has hinted that unsatisfactory answers to some of the questions might be why it's taken so long already. So clearly there's a bit of friction there between 777 and the Premier League and their interpretation of how things are going. But hopefully what we'll have is resolution soon, because everybody needs that to move forward. Just imagine how much uncertainty this is causing. We know how much uncertainty it's causing within the fan base. Imagine how it is within the club as well. Yeah, it must be so difficult. And where we're moving towards a scenario where probably within a couple of weeks we're going to have a takeover resolution either way, and the imminent the points deduction appeal. So, and then the verdict on that. So, Deitch keeps saying that the longer Dominic Calvert-Lewin goes without scoring a goal, the sooner the goal will come. And I think for us, it's the longer we go without an outcome on either of these, the sooner. But in a weird kind of twisted way, the sooner it is, it's the more likely it becomes it's coming soon. So, I think that I was hoping that these two processes wouldn't overlap, and they may not overlap, but it's not a quiet time to be a reporter covering Everton, and I think that I might be looking at the March international break for some time off, because I think I'm going to need it after what's probably going to come in the next couple of weeks.
Well, Everton don't do simple, Joe. We know that. We always do complicated. Yeah, and I'm going to finish on this positive comment from Matt Spears on YouTube. So I assume a Tottenham fan listening to the Everton Fan podcast. He said, Everton will be fine.
Yeah.
Are Everton going to be fine?
I think so, yeah.
I think so too. Okay, everyone listening, watching, Facebook, YouTube, thank you so much. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, follow, hit the like button. Do everything we've asked, and we'll be very appreciative of your support. I think we're going to be back again tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we need to look at Crystal Palace, don't we? Just for anybody that's listening, wondering where the press conference is today, it's going to be on Saturday morning. So a bit of an unusual time there. I'll be down at Finch Farm at 8:30, hopefully getting some sort of breakfast, but I don't know. At least get a cup of tea while I'm waiting for Sean Dyche. But that means that there won't be one today, and there isn't one tomorrow either. So
no. But obviously tomorrow, please join us again. We can preview the Crystal Palace game, even though it's the Monday. Plenty to discuss. Obviously talk about, Roy Hodgson and Crystal Palace themselves. But, hopefully we'll have a couple of players back from injury. The Corday, we're hoping, and Nana's going to be back fully fit. Fingers crossed. The Dominic Calvert-Lewin, whether he starts over Beto, should Beto be given a chance. So, yeah, plenty to discuss, plenty more. So, Joe, thanks very much. I've been Ian Croll, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast. Thank you.